I will attempt to provide a brief chronological history of the prison industrial complex, as gathered from numerous sources, in order to best explain the hidden agenda behind mass incarceration. This analysis will allow for the commentary on the failing economies that encourage individuals to scour for money through other means, the government's criminalization of those means, as well as the incarceration of those individuals, and lastly, the economically driven prison systems that further perpetuates the criminalized activity. Finally, I will strive to provide a solution that could halt the process of this monstrous cycle.
Good evening, my fellow Americans. First, I should like to express my gratitude to the radio and television networks for the opportunities they have given me over the years to bring reports and messages to our nation.
On January 17, 1961, Dwight D. Eisenhower gave his farewell address to the nation. He had witnessed the growing concerns amongst the American public about what he knew was a false missile gap with the Soviet Union. He knew the story had been instrumented by politicians and the press in hopes of increasing military spending. It was then that the military-industrial complex was first brought to public light. Several years later, in the 1990s, the term prison-industrial complex came to describe the attribution of rapid expansion of the U.S. inmate population to the political influence of the private prison business. More specifically, Mike Davis used the term to describe the multi-billion-dollar prison building boom occurring in California.
This is the oath. If I go forward, follow me. If I hesitate, push me. If they kill me, avenge me. If I am a traitor, kill me. That represents a mentality behind bars. It represents, Rita Braver reports, a mentality also loose on the streets.
Members join in prison and when released go to work in the gang's street operations.
Since 1854, California had been home to the first for-profit prison in the United States, San Quentin. Individuals were given power to run the facility, and in turn, they were able to hire out inmates. The events that transgressed with San Quentin would foreshadow the 1970s, when the era of mass incarceration began.
We may control it, say law enforcement officials, but we'll never stop it. Rita Braver, CBS News, San Quentin Prison.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is an unusual press conference.
The start of the prison industrial complex can be traced back to January 3, 1973. On this day, New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller gave a State of the State address in which he demanded that illegal drug dealers be punished with mandatory prison sentences of life without parole. Along with this came the demand for plea bargaining to be forbidden in such cases related to drugs, and that even juvenile offenders should receive life sentences.
They'll be dealing with this subject. I would like to call on each one of these 5 gentlemen.
While it appeared to be a genuine intent of stopping the problem at its root, the solution that was provided quickly spiraled off on its own. In the mid-1970s, the incarceration rate began to climb, then doubled in the 1980s when both federal and state criminal justice budgets grew and the prison population swelled due to tough-on-crime legislation and the war on drugs. The 1980s introduced the concept of Reaganomics in the United States. Reaganomics, a set of neoliberal policies titled after the 40th President of the United States, Ronald Reagan, arguably increased government spending on military and imprisonment, despite its rhetoric of small government.
And raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear. I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully.
It was in October of 1982 that President Ronald Reagan officially declared his administration's war on drugs, despite the American public not viewing drugs as the most prevalent issue facing the nation at the time. The tactic of fear-mongering has effectively been used since the beginning. Between 1980 and 1984, FBI anti-drug funding increased from $8 million to $95 million. This being a harsh contrast to the actual agencies that provided drug treatment, prevention, and the education, which was drastically defunded from $274 million to $57 million during those same years. The war on drugs has been a major contributor to the growing incarceration rate of the United States. Both the Reagan and Bush administrations embraced the idea of private prisons because it felt relevant to their ideas of small government and the privatization of most public services. However, it is thanks to the Clinton administration that the Justice Department placed illegal migrants and minimum security inmates in prison correctional facilities in order to decrease the federal work. The main idea behind the private prisons was that the government monopolies, like the older versions of correctional facilities, were wasteful and ineffective by nature. It was believed that the private sector was able to provide better services for an even lower cost. Due to lower government interference, private prison companies were able to build prisons faster and tended to be less expensive to operate. The growing number of inmates combined with the growing number of drug-related offenses proved to be somewhat of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Instead of the government viewing the increase of drug usage as a health crisis on the rise, public funding was used to create prisons. If we take into account Rockefeller's words, we can see that the original intent was to stop the problem. However, the root of the problem was never fully addressed. What ended up happening was that the more money invested in jails, the less went to public services, which left more people without means of receiving help, which in turn allowed for those people to resort to crime and ultimately end in prison.